Liverpool.
Oh, God! Coulthard. He's going to have it out with David Coulthard.
There are races, and then there's the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix. What unfolded that day at Spa wasn't just chaos, it was a full-blown F1 thriller. Crashes, controversy, a furious garage confrontation, and one team's rise from underdog to history maker. It was the kind of race that left legends speechless and shaped the championship in ways no one saw coming. This wasn't just a Grand Prix, it was the day Formula One changed forever. And it all started with rain. There's a reason why Spa-Francorchamps is revered by drivers and feared by engineers. Its twisting, high-speed layout through the Ardennes forest has always been unpredictable, but nothing could have prepared the Formula One world for what happened in late August of 1998. The skies over Belgium promised a dry race that weekend, but on the morning of the Grand Prix, the weather betrayed everyone. A misty rain blanketed the circuit, transforming the track into a slippery minefield. For the drivers, this wasn't just another wet race, this was a survival test. Even before the chaos began, there were signs that Spa was preparing to deliver something special. Qualifying had seen a fierce battle between the two McLaren teammates, Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard. The duo exchanged fastest laps in a dramatic back and forth, with Hakkinen finally snatching pole position by just 1/10 of a second. Right behind them, former world champion Damon Hill found unexpected pace in his Jordan, slotting into third. Michael Schumacher and Eddie Irvine lined up in fourth and fifth, with Jacques Villeneuve bravely taking sixth despite a scare the day before that nearly rode off his Williams. But for all the drama of qualifying, it would pale in comparison to the main event. Rain had turned Spa into a glassy, unpredictable beast. As cars sat on the grid, tension hung in the air. Some drivers opted for intermediate tires, gambling on a drying track. Others played it safe with full wets. As the lights prepared to go out, one thing was certain: this would be no ordinary race. And when they finally did, Formula One would witness one of its darkest, wildest moments. 13 cars gone in seconds. As the lights went out, what followed was pure mayhem. Mika Hakkinen made a decent launch from pole, but David Coulthard immediately ran into trouble, struggling to find grip in the torrent. Meanwhile, Jacques Villeneuve surged forward with a brave move into the first corner, but as the leaders charged through La Source and headed for the Eau Rouge complex, disaster was quietly building in the pack behind them. In the blinding spray, Coulthard's McLaren was tapped from behind, likely by Eddie Irvine, and spun violently across the track. What followed was one of the worst pileups in Formula One history.
Coulthard in the wall. David Coulthard into the wall. They'll stop the race. They'll have to race.
Cars flew in every direction. Carbon fiber shattered, and bodies of vehicles skidded helplessly into the barriers. The visibility was so poor that drivers didn't see the destruction until it was far too late. At least 13 cars were involved, including the likes of Rubens Barrichello, Olivier Panis, Mika Salo, and Alexander Wurz. The carnage was immense. Wheels detached, noses crumpled, and engines lay exposed. But in what can only be described as a miracle, no one was seriously hurt. Still, the race had to be red flagged immediately. It took officials nearly an hour to clean the debris and prepare backup cars for a restart. Spare chassis were rolled out in a scramble, and teams worked feverishly to piece together functional machines. Amidst the chaos, a young Ralf Schumacher had cleverly steered clear of the destruction, escaping unscathed. For the remaining drivers, though, the reset only meant one thing: another chance to brave the storm. The restart brings even more destruction. When the cars finally lined up again, only 18 were ready to go. Mechanics had done their best to get backup cars prepped and drivers reset their nerves, but Spa wasn't finished with them. As the lights went out for a second time, Damon Hill launched perfectly, diving past both McLarens as they rounded La Source. For a brief moment, Jordan's #1 driver looked poised to turn the chaos into triumph. But behind him, more trouble was brewing. Mika Hakkinen spun as he exited the hairpin, his McLaren snapping around and coming to a stop sideways on the track. Before he could recover, Johnny Herbert Sauber slammed into him. Both cars were immediately out.
Eddie, now Mickey feels a bit under pressure, very close to that Ferrari, hits the throttle a little bit too hard.
The safety car was deployed, but this time, the race would not be stopped. It was a devastating blow for Hakkinen, who had entered Spa as the championship leader and now watched his chances disappear in the ground. To make matters worse for McLaren, Coulthard had a nightmare first lap. He slid off after contact with Alexander Wurz's Benetton, tumbling down to the back of the field. By the time the safety car had bunched up the grid, the order had already shifted dramatically. Damon Hill led from Michael Schumacher, followed by Irvine Jean Villeneuve. It was only just beginning. The cars circled behind the safety car, spraying rooster tails of water, and the field braced for another restart. For Jordan, the impossible was now within reach. For everyone else, it was still a race for survival. Schumacher takes the lead. Once the race resumed, after the second safety car period, Damon Hill's Jordan led the field into the unknown. With intermediate tires and a cautious approach, Hill held off Michael Schumacher's Ferrari for the opening laps, but Spa had no intention of going easy on anyone. The rain intensified, the track turned treacherous again, and soon the conditions favored the Rainmaster himself.
He's 22 seconds ahead of his teammate, Ralf Schumacher.
By lap 7, Schumacher had closed the gap. With perfect timing, he lunged into the bus stop chicane and took the lead from Hill with a clinical overtake. The German was in his element, precise, fearless, and impossibly quick. Within a few laps, he built a lead of several seconds. Behind him, the chaos continued. Jos Verstappen suffered a dramatic engine failure in his Stewart, while Eddie Irvine lost control and damaged his front wing after skipping a chicane. Ralf Schumacher, however, made a crucial strategic move, switching to full wet tires on lap 11. It was a gamble, but one that paid off as the rain persisted. Meanwhile, drivers like Jacques Villeneuve and Jean Villeneuve struggled for grip on intermediates. Villeneuve would eventually spin off just before pitting, while Hill's own stop was delayed slightly due to a front wing adjustment. By lap 17, Schumacher had extended his lead to nearly 30 seconds. Hill was second, with Ralf Schumacher closing in after his clever tire call. It looked like Michael was cruising toward an unchallenged victory, but Formula One doesn't reward comfort, and Spa, in particular, has a way of punishing those who get too confident too soon. One mistake, one explosion. As lap 24 rolled around, Michael Schumacher was in full control. His Ferrari danced through the rain-soaked curves with elegance, leaving everyone else in the mist. Literally. Damon Hill sat second, nearly half a minute behind, while Ralf Schumacher chipped away at the gap from third. Michael was in his own world, lapping slower traffic, carving through the field with clinical precision. Then came the moment that changed everything. As Schumacher closed in on David Coulthard to lap the struggling McLaren, tensions started to build. Coulthard had already voiced concerns about the dangerous conditions and wanted another safety car. Schumacher, impatient with the Scots' cautious pace, gestured angrily from inside the cockpit. On lap 26, his frustration turned into fury. In near-zero visibility, Schumacher's right front tire struck the rear of Coulthard's car.
Whether Coulthard, really saw he was there, he definitely backed off. It's a very strange...
The impact destroyed the Ferrari's suspension and sent both cars limping down the track. Michael's dominant race was over. Just like that, gone was the massive lead, gone was the potential win, and with it, possibly the championship. But the real drama happened in the pit lane. Schumacher returned to the Ferrari garage in a rage, hurled his steering wheel at a mechanic, and stormed down to the McLaren side of the paddock. There, he confronted Coulthard, accusing him of trying to get him killed. The shouting match was explosive. Teams had to step in to physically separate the two. It was no longer just a race, it was war, and Spa was its battlefield. The fallout and the flame. The Schumacher-Coulthard clash ignited more than just tempers. It reshaped the entire narrative of the race. With the dominant Ferrari parked and its furious driver storming the paddock, suddenly the script had changed. Damon Hill found himself back in the lead, a position even he hadn't expected to reclaim after Schumacher's earlier pass. But there was one problem. His teammate was closing in fast. Ralf Schumacher, having benefited from smart tire strategy and consistent driving, had been quietly climbing the ranks. Before his brother's crash, he had already reduced Hill's lead from 22 seconds to just over 10. When the safety car was deployed following a crash between Giancarlo Fisichella and Shinji Nakano, Ralf lined up directly behind his teammate for the restart. For the first time ever, Jordan had a 1-2 in their sights. But could they hold it?
Lapped twice, and Ralf Schumacher's done the same thing, and look at John Alesi!
Inside the Jordan garage, emotions were rising. Eddie Jordan knew this was more than just a race. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Yet complications loomed. Ralf Schumacher was already planning a move to Williams for the following season and wasn't particularly keen on team orders. As the safety car peeled off with 12 laps to go, the battle began. Hill held his line, cautious but quick. Ralph pressed him relentlessly. Over the radio, Hill reminded the team of what was at stake. "If we fight, we risk losing everything," he said, his voice calm but serious. Jordan hesitated, but eventually relented. Team orders were issued. Ralph was told to hold position. He wasn't thrilled, and he wasn't quiet about it either. Team orders in silent defiance. As the rain kept pouring and the laps ticked down, Jordan's fairy tale looked increasingly real. A 1-2 finish was now within reach, something the small team had never achieved. But inside that garage, nerves were fraying. Damon Hill led the race, but Ralf Schumacher was right behind him. Quicker, younger, and determined to win. The question now wasn't just who was faster, but whether team orders would hold. Eddie Jordan and his race engineers faced a delicate balance. They had 2 cars on the podium in a race where chaos had consumed nearly every top contender. But the risk of letting Ralph race Damon was enormous. One small mistake, one lockup, and both cars could end up in the wall. The call was made. Ralph would not be allowed to overtake. Sam Michael, his engineer, relayed the instruction over the radio. Once, then again.
Ralph, you cannot overtake Damon. Okay, that is team order. You cannot overtake Damon.
Then again. For a few laps, Ralph stayed silent. Then came his reply, 2 words, cold, clear, and unmistakably annoyed. Though Ralph kept pushing, he didn't attempt a move on Hill. It wasn't out of obedience, it was calculation. He was already suing Jordan to get out of his contract and join Williams for the following season. The relationship was fractured, and yet, in this moment, Ralph obeyed. Maybe out of professionalism, maybe because he knew what was coming next. Either way, the tension on track was matched only by the tension in the paddock. Behind them, Jean Alesi applied pressure from third, but couldn't get close enough. Further back, Frentzen, Diniz, and Trulli fought quietly for scraps. Spa was winding down, but it wasn't done writing history just yet. The rain claims its final victims. With just a handful of laps remaining, the rain at Spa showed no mercy. Though the lead battle had stabilized between Hill and Ralf Schumacher, the treacherous conditions continued to punish the rest of the field. Grip was scarce, visibility remained poor, and concentration was stretched to its absolute limit. Ferrari's hopes had already been destroyed with Michael Schumacher's retirement, but the misery wasn't over. Eddie Irvine, who had already suffered earlier damage, finally succumbed to the relentless conditions. Clipping a curb, his car snapped sideways and slid off into the gravel. Both Ferraris were now out of the race, an unthinkable outcome given their early pace. Further down the order, Jean Alesi clung to third place in his Sauber, but he wasn't out of danger. Behind him, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Pedro Diniz, and Jarno Trulli kept pushing, hoping the rain might claim one more big-name casualty. But the top 3 held strong. The midfield, meanwhile, was being worn down by Spa's unrelenting punishment. Tire wear, mechanical issues, and poor visibility tested every remaining driver's limits. Incredibly, only 8 cars remained in full contention by the time the race neared its end. 13 had been taken out by crashes, some of them in horrifying pileups, others in lonely spins. The only mechanical retirement of the day belonged to Esteban Tuero in the Minardi, a rare footnote in a race where destruction usually came by contact, not failure. Spa wasn't just eliminating drivers, it was rewriting futures. For some, it was the end of a nightmare. For others, the beginning of a legend. History at the finish line. As the final laps began, it became clear that barring catastrophe, Damon Hill was going to deliver Jordan their first ever Grand Prix victory. Yet, even in those last tense minutes, no one could truly relax. The rain kept falling. The walls were still perilously close, and Ralf Schumacher remained within striking distance. Quiet, patient, but still pushing just enough to remind everyone that this race wasn't over. Damon, meanwhile, had to balance caution with courage. Leading a race in those conditions is its own kind of pressure. Every corner demanded full attention. Every lapped car was a potential hazard, and behind it all was the knowledge that this win, this moment, could define the legacy of both driver and team. He'd been a world champion before, but this was different. This wasn't Williams or Benetton, this was Jordan, and this was Spa. As the final lap began, team radios were silent except for the occasional time check or breathless encouragement. Jordan's pit wall watched with wide eyes and crossed fingers. Hill stayed smooth, consistent, unshaken. Ralph remained close, never launching an attack but never fully dropping off either.
Free is held, and Ralf Schumacher holds position.
When Damon Hill crossed the finish line, it wasn't just a win, it was a moment of sporting triumph. Jordan had done the impossible, not only winning, but finishing 1-2 in the most chaotic race the sport had seen in years. The paddock erupted. Eddie Jordan, overcome with emotion, celebrated with his now iconic jig in the rain-soaked pit lane, and just like that, history had been made against all odds. Aftermath and the championship that slipped away. The celebration at Spa was euphoric, unless you were in red. For Ferrari, the race had been a disaster. Michael Schumacher had been cruising toward victory until the moment it all unraveled. That crash with David Coulthard didn't just cost him the race, it may have cost him the championship. Had Schumacher won at Spa, he would have carried a 6-point lead into the final showdown at Suzuka. Instead, he went into that race trailing Mika Hakkinen by 4. And as history now shows, he never caught up. Back in the Spa paddock, emotions were still swirling. Schumacher had not calmed down after the incident with Coulthard. In fact, he crashed Jordan's podium celebrations to deliver one final message, that Ralph would never drive for the team again, and he meant it. After one final podium at Monza, Ralph left Jordan for Williams, where he would race for 6 more seasons. For Jordan, that 1-2 finish at Spa remained the peak of their existence in Formula One. They would never win another race with both cars on the podium. But it didn't matter. What happened at Spa in 1998 became legend. Only 8 of 22 starters made it to the finish line, 13 cars were eliminated by crashes, 1 by mechanical failure. But the story that lived on wasn't just about carnage, it was about grit, strategy, fury, and glory. In the end, Spa 1998 wasn't just a race, it was a war, a movie, and a masterpiece all rolled into one.